What if I told you that the most powerful man in the city, a guy who could end careers with a single phone call, whose name alone made grown men sweat, was completely disarmed by two simple words from a kid he'd never met before? Yeah, you heard that right. Not by threats. Not by money. Not even by some strategic power move. But by a kid. A child. Someone who had zero clue about the empire of fear this man had built over 3 decades. And here's the thing that's gonna blow your mind. It wasn't what the kid said that shattered everything. It was why he said it. Because in that moment, in front of everyone who mattered, this child exposed something that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Something so raw, so uncomfortably real, that it made everyone in that room question everything they thought they knew about power. You ever been in a space where you can literally feel the tension? Like the air's so thick you could cut it with a knife? Where people are moving around but nobody's really moving, you know what I'm saying? That's the vibe we're talking about here. Picture this old-school Italian restaurant in the heart of the city, the kind of spot where reservations don't mean jack unless you've got the right last name. Mahogany everything, chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses, and this silence that just hangs there like smoke. Now, in the back corner, the power corner if you will, sits Vincent Corello. 72 years old, but sharp as they come. Silver hair slicked back, custom suit that probably cost 5 figures, and these eyes, man, these eyes that have seen everything and forgotten nothing. For real, this dude doesn't just command respect, he takes it. When he walks in, conversations stop. When he speaks, people lean in. That's just how it is. But here's where it gets interesting, and I need you to stick with me on this because what happens next is not what you think. See, Vincent didn't get to where he was by being soft. Word on the street was he'd built his entire empire on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Always calculating, always controlling, never showing weakness. The kind of man who could sit across from you at dinner, share wine, laugh at your jokes, and you'd walk away thinking you were friends. Until you realized 3 months later that every move you made after that dinner somehow benefited him. That's chess, not checkers, homie. So when a kid, couldn't have been more than 9, maybe 10 years old, wandered into that restaurant on a random Tuesday evening, nobody thought twice about it. Just another face in the crowd. Some delivery kid's little brother, probably. Wrong place, wrong time, definitely wrong crowd. The boy's clothes were clean but worn, the kind of worn that comes from being washed too many times, not from designer distressing. His shoes had that scuffed look that tells a story without saying a word. And his eyes? Man, his eyes held something that didn't quite match the setting. Something pure. Something that didn't belong in a room full of people who'd learned to weaponize every word, every glance, every silence. What nobody could have predicted, not the associates sitting at nearby tables, not the staff who'd worked there for decades, not even Vincent himself, was that this kid was about to walk straight up to the most feared man in 6 counties and say something that would crack open a truth nobody wanted to face. You ever see dominoes fall? Not the game, but like actually watching a perfectly lined up chain reaction where one tiny push creates this unstoppable cascade? That's what was about to happen in that restaurant. Except the dominoes were made of secrets, power, and 30 years of carefully constructed control. And it all started with 2 words. Stay with me until the end because what you're about to discover goes way deeper than you think. This isn't just about one kid and one powerful dude. This is about what happens when innocence collides with authority. When something real cuts through everything fake. When a moment of genuine humanity exposes the fact that maybe, just maybe, the strongest people in the room aren't the ones everyone fears. The kid took 3 steps forward. The room got quieter if that was even possible. And Vincent Corello, the man who never flinched, who never hesitated, who'd stared down prosecutors and rivals and even his own mortality with that same cold calculation. Vincent looked up, and something shifted. Something nobody saw coming. Because here's the real deal, and I gotta be straight with you for a second. If this story's already got you hooked, if you're feeling that pull to see where this goes, do me a solid right now and smash that like button. No cap, it actually matters. Every single like tells the algorithm that stories like this, real, deep human stories that make you feel something, deserve to be seen by more people. And honestly, in a world full of clickbait and surface-level content, we need more of this. And look, if you're vibing with what we're building here, a space where storytelling actually means something, where we dig into the messy, beautiful complexity of human nature, hit that subscribe button. That's our pact. I bring you stories that'll stick with you long after the video ends, and you help keep this community growing. We're in this together, fam. Alright, now back to Vincent and that kid. So let me paint the full picture for you because understanding where this kid came from, that's everything. The boy, his name was Marco, lived in a small apartment about 15 blocks from that restaurant. Just him, his mom Elena, and his grandmother Rosa. 3 generations stacked in a 2-bedroom walk-up with radiators that clanked all winter and windows that never quite closed all the way. But here's what you need to understand. That apartment might have been small, but the values inside those walls? Those were massive. Rosa, the grandmother, she was old school. Like old school. The kind of woman who still ironed bed sheets, who made her own pasta every Sunday, who could tell you stories about a time when a handshake meant more than any contract. She'd grown up in a village in southern Italy where your word was literally your currency. Break it and you were done. Not just with one person, with the entire community. That reputation thing? It followed you to your grave and beyond. Elena, Marco's mom, she'd absorbed those lessons but filtered them through the reality of raising a kid alone in a city that didn't care about your traditions or your dignity. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at a bakery, evenings cleaning offices downtown. The kind of work that makes you invisible. People look right through you when you're wiping down their desks or refilling their coffee station. And over time, that invisibility? It teaches you something about power. About who has it and who doesn't. About where you stand in the hierarchy. But Marco, man. Marco was different. At 9 years old, this kid had this quality that you don't see much anymore. He noticed things. Not in an annoying, invasive way, but in this quiet, observant way that made you feel like he actually saw you. When his grandmother told stories, he didn't just hear words, he absorbed the meaning behind them. When his mom came home exhausted, he didn't need to be told to be quiet or helpful. He just knew. His grandmother had taught him 3 principles that she said were non-negotiable. 3 things that, if you held on to them, would define your character no matter what life threw at you. First, emotional awareness. The ability to feel what others feel even when they're hiding it. Rosa used to tell him, Marco, people show you who they are in the small moments. The way they treat someone who can't do anything for them, that's the truth. And somehow this kid got it. He could walk into a room and sense the tension, the sadness, the unspoken fears that adults spent their whole lives learning to mask. Second, quiet courage. Not the loud, aggressive kind that demands attention. The kind that shows up when it would be easier to look away. The kind that does what's right even when your hands are shaking. Rosa called it coraggio silenzioso, silent courage. She'd say, anyone can yell. Anyone can make noise. But to stand firm without raising your voice? That takes real strength. And third, maybe the hardest one, persistence. The ability to keep going when everyone tells you to stop. When the pressure builds, when the fear gets real, when every logical part of your brain is screaming at you to back down, you hold your ground. Not out of stubbornness but out of conviction. Now, Vincent Corello, the man sitting in that restaurant, he built his entire empire on a completely opposite philosophy. For him, power meant distance. Emotional distance, physical distance, psychological distance. You don't let people in. You don't show vulnerability. You don't create openings where someone can hurt you or use you or make you feel anything you can't control. This wasn't just some random business strategy for Vincent. This came from somewhere deep. Decades earlier, he'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. Someone close, someone he'd considered family. That betrayal had cost him everything he'd built at the time. Almost destroyed him. So he rebuilt, but this time with walls. Thick ones. The kind that keep everyone at arm's length, where every interaction is transactional, where sentiment is weakness. His motivation wasn't greed, at least not primarily. It was control. Because in his mind, the moment you lose control, the moment you let chaos creep in through even the smallest crack, everything falls apart. So he managed every detail, every relationship, every potential threat with this cold, calculated precision that had become second nature. But here's where the transformation starts to happen, and this is where it gets deep. 3 days before Marco walked into that restaurant, something small had occurred. Something so minor that most people wouldn't even register it. Elena, Marco's mom, had been on her evening cleaning route downtown. One of the buildings she cleaned, the 3rd floor, housed an accounting firm that did work for several of Vincent's businesses. Nothing illegal, just bookkeeping, tax stuff, the boring back end that keeps any operation running. Elena had been emptying trash cans when she'd found something. A small leather wallet, expensive looking, tucked between a desk and a filing cabinet. Inside was cash, credit cards, and an ID that belonged to someone important. She could have pocketed the cash. God knows she needed it. $300 would have covered groceries for a month. But Rosa's voice echoed in her head. Your integrity is the only thing no one can take from you. So Elena turned it in to the building security, no questions asked, no expectation of reward. Security traced it back to one of Vincent's accountants. The accountant mentioned it to Vincent. Vincent asked who'd found it. When he heard it was some cleaning lady who didn't even leave her name, something flickered in him. Just for a second. A recognition of something he thought had gone extinct. He'd made a phone call. Had someone tracked down which cleaning company serviced that building? Had them find out who was on shift that night? And when he learned it was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her kid and her elderly mother, he'd arranged something. Nothing direct. Vincent didn't do direct kindness. But he'd made sure the building management gave her a quiet bonus. Told them to say it was for exceptional service. $200 in an envelope with no name attached. Elena had come home that night, shown the envelope to Rosa and Marco, tears in her eyes. "I don't know where this came from," she'd said. "But God sees us. Someone sees us." Marco had listened to the whole story. And in his 9-year-old mind, with those principles his grandmother had drilled into him, he processed it simply. Someone had done something kind for his mother. That meant he owed gratitude. Not just silent gratitude but expressed gratitude. Because that's what you do. That's what honor demands. So when Marco heard through neighborhood whispers, because word travels fast in tight communities, that the man behind the gesture sometimes ate at that old Italian restaurant, he decided he needed to go there. Needed to say thank you. His mother had tried to talk him out of it. "Marco, you don't understand these things. That world, it's not for us. You don't just walk into places like that." But persistence, right? That third principle. Marco had waited until his mother was at work, told his grandmother he was going to a friend's house, and instead walked those 15 blocks to the restaurant. Now here's where it gets psychologically intense, and I want you to really sit with this because it reveals something about human nature that we don't talk about enough. The moment Marco stepped into that restaurant, he entered a completely different ecosystem. This wasn't just about money or class, though that was part of it. This was about invisible rules, unspoken hierarchies, codes of conduct that had been established over generations. Who speaks first? Who makes eye contact? Who has permission to approach? Who exists and who doesn't? And Marco, this kid in his worn-out jeans and second-hand jacket, he just violated every single one of those rules by walking through the door. The maitre d' had moved to intercept him immediately, but something about the boy's face, that lack of fear, that genuine innocence, had made him hesitate. In that split-second hesitation, Marco had already spotted Vincent in the back corner. Had already started walking toward him with this purpose that seemed bigger than his small frame. The associates at the nearby tables had tensed up. Hands had moved subtly toward pockets. Eyes had tracked every step. Because in their world, unexpected variables were threats. Always. Vincent himself had looked up from his espresso, and for the first time in probably 20 years, he'd been genuinely surprised. Not threatened, his security was too good for that. But surprised. Because this kid clearly didn't belong here, clearly had no idea what kind of space he'd just entered, and yet was walking toward him with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. And then Marco had stopped about 3 feet from the table, close enough to be heard but not so close as to be invasive. Another thing his grandmother had taught him about respect, and he'd said it. "Thank you." Just those 2 words. Clear, direct, sincere. "Thank you for helping my mom." The restaurant didn't just go quiet. It went silent. Like someone had hit a mute button on reality itself. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade into nothing. Because everyone in that room understood instantly what had just happened. This kid had just done something that no one, not rivals, not prosecutors, not even family, had managed to do in 3 decades. He'd caught Vincent Corello completely off guard. Had walked past every defense mechanism, every psychological barrier, every carefully constructed wall, and delivered a moment of pure, unfiltered human connection. And Vincent, this man who'd built an empire on emotional distance, who trained himself to calculate every interaction, who never let anyone see behind the mask. Vincent didn't have a response ready for this. There was no playbook for genuine gratitude from a child who expected nothing in return. The seconds stretched out. Marco stood there waiting, not nervous but patient. The way you wait when you've done something you believe is right and you're willing to face whatever comes next. Vincent's face remained neutral, but if you'd been watching closely, really closely, you would have seen something shift in his eyes. A crack in the armor so small that most people would have missed it. But Marco didn't miss it. Because that emotional awareness his grandmother had taught him was real. The boy had seen past the power, past the reputation, past the fear everyone else carried, and had looked directly at the human being underneath. And in doing so he'd created a problem. Because now Vincent had to decide something fundamental about who he was. The next few days were strange for Marco. He'd gone home that night feeling like he'd done the right thing, but something was off. He started noticing things. When he walked through the neighborhood, certain adults would look at him longer than usual. Conversations would stop when he got close to storefronts. His mother had been jumpy, kept asking him if anything unusual had happened at school. Then came the first real obstacle. His mother had sat him down one evening, her face tight with worry. "Marco, I need you to listen to me carefully. Whatever you did, wherever you went last week, you can't do that again. You understand? Some doors aren't meant for people like us. Some thank yous are better left unsaid." She wouldn't explain further, but Marco could feel it, that undercurrent of fear. Not fear of violence necessarily, but fear of having disturbed something that was supposed to stay undisturbed. Fear of consequences that people in their position couldn't afford. The second obstacle was internal. Marco started second-guessing himself. Maybe he'd been naive. Maybe his grandmother's principles applied to a world that didn't exist anymore. Maybe he'd crossed a line he didn't even know was there, and now his family would pay the price for his ignorance. He felt it in his chest, that heaviness that comes when you realize you might have made a mistake that affects people you love. When your good intentions might have opened a door that should have stayed closed. But here's what's fascinating about truth and authenticity: they create ripples that can't be undone. Marco had set something in motion that night in the restaurant. Something that went beyond his action, beyond Vincent's response, beyond that single moment of silence. Because in that world of calculated moves and strategic relationships, where everything was transactional and nothing was quite real, a 9-year-old kid had just introduced something that didn't fit the algorithm. Genuine human connection. No angle. No agenda. No hidden motive. And Vincent? Vincent was about to do something that would shock everyone who thought they knew him. Something that would force people to question everything they believed about power, control, and what it actually means to be strong. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what happens next isn't just about one man making one choice. It's about what happens when someone who's built their entire identity on being untouchable suddenly realizes they've been touched. When someone who's convinced themselves that emotional distance equals strength discovers that maybe, just maybe, they've been wrong about everything. Drop a comment right now if this is hitting different for you. Just write, "This is real." Because here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Not Marco, not his family, and definitely not the people who'd spent years inside Vincent's circle thinking they understood how things worked. About 2 weeks after that moment in the restaurant, something strange started happening. Marco would be walking home from school and one of the neighborhood guys, always different people, always casual, would stop him. "Hey kid, you got a minute? Need someone to run an errand. $5. Simple stuff. Deliver a package to the bakery. Pick up an envelope from the barber shop." Nothing that seemed important. But here's what you need to understand about that world. Nothing is random. Every interaction has layers. Every small favor creates invisible threads of obligation that connect people in ways that outsiders can't see. In that culture, the one Rosa had taught Marco about through her stories, there's this concept called debito de honor, debt of honor. When someone does something for you, especially something that touches your family, you don't just say thanks and move on. The debt exists until it's properly resolved. Vincent hadn't asked for Marco to be brought into his orbit. But the kid had inserted himself into the equation with that thank you, and now the old customs, the ones Vincent had thought he'd left behind decades ago, were activating in ways he couldn't quite control. So these small tasks, they were Vincent's way of processing what had happened. Of trying to understand this kid who'd somehow managed to bypass every defense mechanism he'd spent 30 years perfecting. Marco didn't fully understand it either, but he showed up when called. Did what was asked. Never complained, never questioned, never tried to leverage it into something bigger. And that, right there? That was what started changing the atmosphere. During one of these casual encounters, Marco was waiting in the back office of a social club. One of those old-school spots with velvet chairs, yellowed photographs on the walls, and the smell of cigar smoke baked into the wood paneling. He was supposed to pick up some documents to take to the restaurant, but whoever was supposed to give them to him was running late. So Marco sat there, looking around, taking it all in with that quiet observation his grandmother had cultivated in him. And on the wall, partially hidden behind a newer frame, he noticed something. A small brass plaque with an inscription in Italian. The words were old-fashioned, formal, but Marco recognized them because Rosa had told him stories about this exact tradition. Public thanks are honor made visible. Public gratitude is honor made visible. It was from an old custom, one that went back generations in certain Italian communities. The idea was that when someone did something worthy of respect, you didn't whisper your thanks in private, you announced it publicly. You made the honor visible so that everyone in the community could witness it and understand the value of the action. It was a way of reinforcing social bonds, of teaching younger generations what mattered, of creating a culture where dignity and respect were performed, not just felt. Marco stared at that plaque for a long time, and something clicked in his mind. He hadn't just thanked Vincent, he'd done it publicly in front of everyone who mattered in Vincent's world. Without knowing it, without planning it, Marco had performed one of the oldest rituals of respect in that culture. And that's why the silence had been so profound. That's why the atmosphere had shifted so dramatically. He'd accidentally reminded everyone in that room, Vincent included, of something they'd forgotten. Or maybe something they'd deliberately buried because it didn't fit with the harder, more pragmatic version of power they'd adopted over the years. And the transformation, the real mental shift, was starting to happen. Not just in Vincent but in the entire ecosystem around him. The restaurant started feeling different. People who'd worked there for years noticed it but couldn't quite articulate what had changed. The lighting seemed warmer somehow, though no one had replaced the bulbs. Conversations had more space in them. Less tension, less performance, less of that exhausting alertness that comes from constantly calculating who has the upper hand. Even Vincent's associates, the guys who'd been with him for decades, they felt it. The mandatory Sunday dinners that used to feel like business meetings with pasta now had moments of actual laughter. Real laughter, not the careful, strategic kind. People were asking about each other's families, sharing problems, offering help without immediately thinking about what they'd get in return. It was subtle, but it was real. Like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for too long, and fresh air was slowly replacing the stale atmosphere everyone had gotten used to. There was this woman, Maria, who'd been part of Vincent's world since the beginning. She was in her 70s now, the widow of Vincent's first mentor. She didn't work for him. She was more like a keeper of tradition, someone whose opinion carried weight precisely because she had no stake in the daily operations. She represented the old ways, the moral compass that everyone knew existed but rarely consulted. Maria had been watching Marco during his visits. She'd noticed the way he carried himself, respectful but not scared, helpful but not subservient. And one afternoon she'd pulled him aside after he'd finished one of his errands. "You remind me of how things used to be," she told him in Italian, knowing somehow that Rosa had taught him the language. "Before we all forgot that power without honor is just fear dressed up nice." Her motivation was crystal clear to anyone who'd known her for years. She was terrified that everything meaningful about their culture would disappear. That the next generation would only inherit the hard parts. The control, the distance, the calculated coldness, without understanding the principles that were supposed to balance those things out. Principles like loyalty, honor, public gratitude, and the idea that true strength includes the capacity for kindness. She saw in Marco the possibility of transmission, of keeping something alive that was on the verge of extinction. But not everyone felt good about these changes. There was this guy, Tony, who'd been Vincent's right hand for almost 20 years. Tony was smart, efficient, absolutely loyal, and deeply uncomfortable with anything that disrupted the established order. His entire identity was built on understanding the rules, following the protocols, maintaining the structure. And this kid? This random 9-year-old who showed up out of nowhere and somehow shifted the entire emotional frequency of their world? That was chaos to Tony. That was unpredictability. That was the kind of variable that could lead to mistakes, exposure, vulnerability. Tony's motivation wasn't malicious. He genuinely believed that stability, rigid, predictable, controlled stability, was the only thing keeping everyone safe. Every deviation from protocol was a potential crack in the foundation. And if Marco represented a return to older, softer values, then Marco represented risk. So Tony started watching, started testing, started creating small situations to see how the kid would handle pressure. And inevitably Marco slipped up. It was a simple task, honestly. He was supposed to deliver a message to a specific person at a specific time. But he'd gotten the time wrong, showed up 30 minutes late because he'd misunderstood the instructions. The message wasn't critical. Nothing was actually damaged by the delay, but Tony had been waiting for this. Had been looking for proof that this whole situation was a mistake. Tony called Marco out in front of a group of guys at the social club. Not yelling, Tony was too controlled for that, but with that cold, cutting precision that's somehow worse than anger. He made it clear that lateness was disrespect. That disrespect wouldn't be tolerated. That Marco might be some kind of novelty to certain people, but in the real world, you either performed or you were out. The humiliation was complete, public, witnessed by men whose opinions Marco had started to care about. These weren't abstract figures anymore, They were people whose nods of approval or looks of disappointment actually meant something to him. Marco had stood there, face burning, eyes fixed on the floor, absorbing every word. He didn't cry, not there, not in front of them, but inside, something was crumbling. The confidence that had carried him into that restaurant weeks ago, that had allowed him to speak his truth without fear, suddenly felt like naive stupidity. That night, alone in his room with the door closed and the lights off, Marco let it out. The tears came hard, the kind that shake your whole body. Not just because he'd been embarrassed, but because he was questioning everything. Had he been wrong to approach Vincent? Had his grandmother's values set him up for failure in a world that operated by completely different rules? Was kindness actually weakness disguised as virtue? Every step forward in this strange new territory seemed to cost him something. The emotional toll of trying to bridge two worlds, his grandmother's world of honor and openness, and this other world of calculation and distance, was getting heavier with each passing day. And here's the brutal truth about transformation and growth: it never happens smoothly. The decision to live by certain principles, to maintain your values even when they make you vulnerable, comes with real costs. There are moments when doing the right thing leaves you exposed. When your authenticity gets punished by systems built on something else entirely. Marco was learning that lesson the hard way. And the question becoming clearer in his mind was whether the cost was worth it. Whether maintaining his integrity was worth the pain. Whether he should keep showing up or do what his mother had begged him to do. Walk away from this world that wasn't meant for people like them. But something was building beneath the surface. All these small interactions, these moments of tension and connection, these collisions between old values and new realities, they were creating pressure. The kind of pressure that precedes a revelation. The kind that forces people to make choices about who they really are when everything is on the line. Because Vincent had been watching all of this. Every test Tony put Marco through. Every small victory and every failure. And something was happening inside him that he hadn't felt in decades. Something that scared him because it felt like weakness but looked suspiciously like conscience. Now here's what I need from you, and I'm being real with you right now. Have you ever been in a situation where you did something with your whole heart? Something you knew was right, but it cost you? Maybe it cost you socially, maybe emotionally, maybe in some other way that left a mark. Where your values put you at odds with the system, and you had to decide whether to adapt or hold firm. Drop that story in the comments. Seriously. Because this isn't just entertainment. This is about real human experience. About the price we pay for authenticity in a world that often rewards performance over truth. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Might help them feel less alone in whatever they're facing. And here's why it matters beyond just connection. When we share these experiences, when we create space for real conversations about the messy parts of trying to live with integrity, we're building something bigger than any individual story. We're creating proof that it's possible. That people have walked this path before and survived it. That the cost, as heavy as it feels in the moment, might actually be worth it in ways we can't see yet. So write it down below. Make it part of this conversation. Because what happens next in Marco's story, and I'm telling you it's about to get intense, it speaks directly to that question of whether holding onto your values in hostile territory is courage or foolishness. Now I want to go even deeper into this because what happened next wasn't just about Marco or Vincent anymore. It became about something way bigger. About what happens when a community starts remembering who they used to be before fear became the primary operating system. About 8 months into this whole situation, Maria, that older woman who'd recognized something in Marco, she made a move that shocked everyone. She announced that she wanted to bring back La Festa del Ringraziamento, the Festival of Gratitude. This wasn't just some random party idea. This was a tradition that went back generations, one that hadn't been celebrated in Vincent's circle for over 15 years. Here's what most people didn't know: the festival had been mentioned in passing throughout Marco's visits. Rosa had told him stories about it at their kitchen table, how the whole community would gather once a year, how people would publicly acknowledge the debts of honor they owed to each other, how younger generations would learn what gratitude actually looked like when performed with intention and ceremony. There'd been specific foods involved, particular pastries that took days to prepare, wine from specific regions, music that nobody played anymore except at weddings and funerals. Maria had been dropping hints about these traditions during Marco's errands. A comment here about how we used to make these cookies for the festival. A story there about when the musicians would play until sunrise. She'd been planting seeds, testing the ground, seeing if there was any fertile soil left in this hardened environment. And apparently there was. Because when Maria formally proposed bringing the festival back, something unexpected happened. People got excited. Not everyone and not openly at first, but you could feel it. The older generation, the ones who remembered, they lit up with this nostalgic energy. Even some of the younger guys who'd grown up hearing stories but never experiencing it, they were curious. Wanted to see what the old folks kept talking about. But here's where it got complicated. The festival, by its very nature, required vulnerability. It required people to stand up publicly and express gratitude, admit debts, acknowledge that they needed help. In Vincent's world, this carefully controlled ecosystem where showing need was showing weakness, that was basically asking people to strip naked emotionally in front of everyone who mattered. Tony was vehemently against it. He saw it as exactly what he'd feared: chaos disguised as tradition. A return to sentiment that would undermine the discipline they'd worked so hard to maintain. He didn't say it openly, but the subtext was clear. This was Marco's influence, and it was dangerous. Vincent himself was conflicted in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Part of him, the part that remembered being a kid himself, learning these traditions from his own grandfather, felt something stirring. A longing maybe. A sense that something essential had been lost along the way. But the other part, the part that had kept him alive and in power for 3 decades, was screaming warnings. Control through emotional distance was his foundation. This festival threatened to crack that foundation wide open. But Maria had leverage. She represented the old guard, the moral authority that even Vincent couldn't completely dismiss. And she framed it perfectly: we're not asking you to change who you are. We're asking you to remember where you came from. So the festival got approved. Preparations began. And Marco found himself at the center of something he hadn't anticipated and definitely hadn't signed up for. Because here's what nobody told him until it was too late. At the Festival of Gratitude, the youngest person who'd performed an act worthy of public recognition was traditionally asked to speak first. To set the tone. To demonstrate for everyone else what genuine gratitude looked like. When Marco found out he was expected to speak, not just attend but actually stand up in front of everyone and say something, the fear hit him like a physical force. This wasn't delivering a message or running an errand. This was performance. Exposure. Standing in front of people who'd spent decades perfecting the art of reading weakness and exploiting it, and putting his heart on display. The night before the festival, he couldn't sleep. Kept rehearsing words that sounded stupid every time he tried them out loud. His mom was worried, could see the stress eating at him. She told him he didn't have to do it, that no one would blame a kid for backing out. But Rosa, his grandmother, she sat with him at the kitchen table and said something that cut through all the noise. "Marco, you're not being asked to be impressive. You're being asked to be honest. Those are not the same thing." The day of the festival arrived. The restaurant had been transformed, tables moved to create space, traditional decorations that must have been pulled from storage somewhere, and this energy in the air that was equal parts excitement and anxiety. People showed up dressed nicer than usual, carrying dishes they'd spent days preparing, bringing relatives who normally wouldn't be allowed anywhere near this world. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A collision of past and present, of vulnerability and power, of everything these people had been trying to bury for years suddenly demanding to be seen. Marco stood near the back, watching it all unfold, feeling the weight of what was coming. And here's the brutal part: not everyone was supportive. There were guys, associates of Vincent, people whose respect Marco had been slowly earning, who were looking at him with skepticism bordering on hostility. Like he was some kind of Trojan horse destroying their carefully balanced system from the inside. The silent resistance was almost worse than open opposition. It's one thing to have someone tell you to your face that they don't believe in you. It's another thing entirely to see it in their eyes, in the way they position their bodies when you enter a room, in the conversations that stop just a bit too deliberately when you approach. When Maria finally called for attention and announced that Marco would speak first, the room went quiet. That same quality of silence from the night he'd first thanked Vincent, but heavier now. Weighted with expectation and judgment and 8 months of accumulated meaning. Marco walked to the front. His legs felt disconnected from his body. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The faces looking at him ranged from encouraging to neutral to actively hostile. And somewhere in that crowd was Vincent, watching with an expression Marco couldn't read. He opened his mouth. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended, shaky with nerves. But he pushed through, remembering Rosa's words about honesty versus impressiveness. He didn't try to sound eloquent or wise. He just spoke his truth. He thanked Vincent, publicly and specifically, for the kindness shown to his mother. He explained what that money had meant, not just financially but emotionally. How it had reminded his family that they were seen, that their dignity mattered, that someone in a position of power had chosen to use that power for good. And then, And this is where it got real. Marco did something unscripted. He thanked Tony. Specifically thanked him for the correction, for holding him accountable when he'd failed, for teaching him that honor includes responsibility and follow-through. The room was absolutely still. Because what Marco had just done was reframe humiliation as education. He'd taken the moment that was supposed to break him and turned it into evidence of growth. He'd publicly acknowledged a debt to someone who'd been actively hostile, and in doing so, had made it impossible for Tony to maintain that hostility without looking petty. It was a masterclass in emotional intelligence from a 9-year-old kid who didn't even realize he was doing it. When Marco finished speaking, the silence stretched out for what felt like forever. And then Maria started clapping. Slow, deliberate, ceremonial. Others joined in, not because they were convinced but because the ritual demanded it. But in that applause, something shifted. The atmosphere cracked open just a bit wider. The festival continued. Other people spoke. Gratitude flowed more freely than anyone had seen in years. And Vincent, watching all of this unfold, felt something he'd been suppressing for months finally surface into his conscious awareness. He was losing control of his own transformation. This wasn't something he'd chosen. This wasn't strategic. Marco's presence, these traditions being resurrected, the emotional climate changing in his world. None of it was according to his plan. And that scared him more than any external threat ever had. Because if he wasn't in control of his own evolution, then who was he really? So Vincent did what frightened people do when change comes too fast. He retreated, started canceling meetings, stopped coming to the restaurant as regularly, created distance between himself and the situation, hoping that separation would let him regain perspective and control. The impact was immediate. Without Vincent's presence stabilizing things, the environment became unstable. People didn't know what the new rules were. The tentative openness that had been developing started to close back up as everyone defaulted to old patterns, old protections. It was like watching a flower try to bloom and then getting hit with frost. Marco felt it acutely. He'd opened himself up, made himself vulnerable at that festival, and now the person whose opinion mattered most had disappeared. It felt like rejection. Like confirmation that maybe he'd been wrong all along. Maybe you can't bring old values into new systems. Maybe transformation requires everyone to be on board, and the moment the person with the most power checks out, the whole thing collapses. And then, right when Marco was at his lowest point emotionally, Rosa got sick. Not life-threatening, but serious enough that she needed care. Elena was already stretched thin between her 2 jobs, so Marco stepped up without hesitation. He stopped going to the restaurant entirely. Stopped doing errands. Stopped participating in that world at all because his grandmother, the person who taught him everything about honor and gratitude and dignity, needed him. This was his motivation laid bare. Not the approval of powerful men. Not being part of some exclusive world. Not even the satisfaction of changing a corrupt system. It was honoring the person who'd made him who he was. Repaying the debt he owed to the woman who'd given him the tools to navigate everything he'd been through. For 3 weeks, Marco was gone from Vincent's orbit completely. And in his absence, something interesting happened. People realized how much his presence had actually mattered. The small acts of kindness he'd performed without asking for recognition. The way he'd connected older and younger generations. The mirror he'd held up showing what values looked like when lived instead of just discussed. Maria visited Rosa during her recovery, bringing food and medicine and spending time just talking. She told Marco something he'd never forget. The truest test of your impact isn't what happens when you're present. It's what people remember when you're gone. When Rosa finally recovered and Marco prepared to return, he was different. Not harder exactly, but more grounded. He'd been reminded of what actually mattered. He'd faced the possibility of losing the person who'd shaped his entire worldview, and that perspective had recalibrated everything else. But when he walked back into the restaurant for the first time in weeks, the reception wasn't what he'd expected. People looked at him differently now, not as a novelty or a disruption, but as someone who'd proven something essential. He'd chosen family over access. He'd walked away from power and influence without hesitation when something more important called. And in that world, where loyalty was currency and everyone was always calculating their next move, Marco's choice had been a statement nobody could misinterpret. He'd shown that his values weren't performance. They were foundational. And that changed how people saw him. The weight of respect, real respect, settled on his shoulders. It was heavier than he'd anticipated. Because now expectations came with it. Now people were watching not just to see if he'd fail, but to see if he'd continue being who he'd proven himself to be. Vincent still hadn't returned. The question hanging over everything was whether he ever would. Whether the transformation Marco had accidentally catalyzed would survive without the participation of the one person whose power could legitimize it. Or whether everything would slowly collapse back into old patterns, old fears, old distances. But what nobody knew yet, not Marco, not Maria, not even Vincent himself, was that something had been building in Vincent's isolation. A reckoning with truths he'd been avoiding for decades. And when he finally made his move, when he finally showed up again, the decision he'd made in private was going to force everyone to confront what power actually means when stripped of its usual disguises. Write this if you've ever had to choose between what looks impressive and what's actually right. I chose right. Vincent showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, when the restaurant was mostly empty. Just the staff prepping for dinner service and a couple of regulars nursing espresso at the bar. Marco happened to be there. Maria had asked him to help move some chairs for an upcoming event. When Vincent walked through the door, the moment stretched out. Everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't the commanding entrance of a man asserting dominance. This was something else. Something quieter. Vincent looked older somehow, like those weeks away had added years instead of days. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His posture, while still upright, carried a weight that hadn't been visible before. He made eye contact with Marco across the room and gestured toward the back office. Not a command. An invitation. Marco followed, his pulse quickening, not from fear but from uncertainty. He had no idea what this conversation would be, and after everything that had happened, after all the emotional exhaustion of the past months, he wasn't sure he had the energy for another test. The office was small, windowless, with that same old-world aesthetic, dark wood, brass fixtures, a single desk lamp casting warm light. Vincent closed the door but didn't sit behind the desk. Instead, he leaned against it, facing Marco, removing the physical barrier of authority that the desk represented. The silence was heavy but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that precedes truth, the kind where both people know something important is about to be said and they're both scared of what it might cost. Marco, standing there with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched from weeks of caretaking and emotional strain, did something he'd never done before in Vincent's presence. He let his guard down completely. Not strategically. Not as some calculated move. But because he was tired of performing, tired of trying to navigate invisible rules, tired of wondering if he was enough. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Marco said, his voice quiet but steady. I thought if I just stayed true to what my grandmother taught me, if I just kept being honest and respectful, that would be enough. But I'm scared that I'm not actually changing anything. That maybe I'm just a kid who got lucky once and everyone's been too polite to tell me I don't belong here. The vulnerability was complete. No performance, no protection, just raw admission of inadequacy from someone who'd been carrying the weight of everyone's projections, positive and negative, for months. Vincent didn't respond immediately. He looked at Marco like he was seeing him clearly for the first time, not through the lens of threat or novelty or even gratitude, but as an actual human being struggling with the same fundamental fear that everyone struggles with. What if I'm not enough? And in that moment of recognition, something in Vincent broke open. Not shattered. Breaking open is different from shattering. Shattering is destruction. Breaking open is when something that's been sealed too tight finally allows itself to breathe. You know what the hardest thing I ever learned was? Vincent said, his voice carrying an edge of something Marco had never heard from him before. Something almost like regret. That control isn't the same thing as strength. I spent 30 years building walls, creating distance, making sure no one could get close enough to hurt me. And I was successful. Nobody got through. But I also realized something during these last few weeks. Nobody got to me either. Not really. I was completely safe and completely alone. He paused, running his hand through his silver hair, a gesture of weariness that made him seem suddenly, startlingly human. You walked in here 8 months ago and did something I haven't seen in my entire adult life. You offered gratitude with no agenda. You were real in a place where everyone else is performing. And it terrified me because it reminded me of a version of myself I'd buried so deep I forgot he existed. A version that believed kindness could coexist with strength. The confession hung in the air between them. This was unprecedented. Vincent Corello, admitting vulnerability to a 9-year-old kid. Acknowledging that he'd been changed by someone he could have dismissed with a single word. Then Vincent did something that completed the circle in a way that no words could. He extended his hand to Marco, not for a handshake but palm up, in that old gesture of gratitude that Rosa had told Marco about. The one where you offer your hand not to receive but to acknowledge a debt that can't be repaid in currency. And then, barely audible in Italian, Vincent said it, "Grazie." Thank you. The same words Marco had said to him 8 months ago. The same public act of recognition, except this time in private. This time stripped of audience, of performance, of any possible strategic value. This was Vincent, alone with his conscience, admitting that a child had taught him something essential about what power is actually for. Marco took Vincent's hand and something fundamental shifted. Not in any dramatic, cinematic way. No swelling music or sudden revelation. Just a quiet rebalancing of what respect looks like when it flows both directions. When it's not about hierarchy or fear or control, but about recognizing the humanity in someone regardless of their position in whatever structure you're operating within. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and then Vincent released his grip and straightened up. The transformation wasn't complete. Vincent would always be Vincent, would always carry the calculated precision of someone who'd survived by staying 3 steps ahead. But now there was space in that calculation for something else. For the possibility that being human didn't automatically mean being weak. Over the following weeks, the changes became more visible. Vincent started showing up to the restaurant regularly again, but his presence was different. He'd ask people about their families. He'd remember details about their lives that had nothing to do with business. Small things, but in that environment, small things carried massive weight. The atmosphere shifted in ways that were hard to quantify but impossible to miss. The air felt lighter. Conversations had more laughter in them. People seemed less exhausted by the constant vigilance that had been required before. It wasn't paradise. There were still tensions, still conflicts, still the reality of what that world was. But there was breathing room now. Space for people to be slightly more themselves without immediate consequences. Tony, interestingly, became one of the biggest beneficiaries of this shift. With the pressure to maintain absolute control slightly reduced, he could relax into competence without paranoia. He and Marco developed an unlikely rapport based on mutual respect. Marco valued Tony's discipline and knowledge, and Tony recognized Marco's integrity as something rare and worth protecting. Maria watched all of this unfold with satisfaction, but also with the wisdom of someone who understood that sustainable change takes time. She pulled Marco aside one afternoon and told him something crucial: "What you started here won't stay perfect. People will backslide. Old patterns will resurface. But you've proven something important. That transformation is possible even in places that seem completely hardened. And that proof alone is valuable, even when it's difficult." Marco himself was exhausted but settled in a way he hadn't been before. The constant anxiety about whether he belonged, whether he was making a difference, whether his values would survive contact with harsh reality, that had quieted down. Not because everything was resolved, but because he'd seen evidence that his approach, as imperfect and painful as it sometimes was, could actually create real change. He understood now that every small victory had cost something. The emotional exposure at the festival. The humiliation from Tony that had forced him to grow. The weeks of caretaking that had pulled him away from everything else. The constant navigation between his grandmother's principles and the practical demands of a world that didn't naturally accommodate those principles. But he also understood something deeper about impact and legacy. That the person he'd become through this process, more resilient, more aware, more capable of holding complexity without losing his core values, that person was worth the cost. The transformation wasn't just in Vincent or the restaurant environment. It was in Marco himself. And here's what nobody was talking about but everyone was feeling. The example they'd collectively created was starting to radiate outward. Other people in that broader community, people who'd heard stories about what was happening at Vincent's restaurant, they were curious. Some were skeptical, some were inspired, but everyone was paying attention to this experiment and whether you could maintain power while also maintaining humanity. The question that remained, and this is where it gets really interesting, was whether this change could survive beyond the individuals who'd created it. Whether it was a moment or a movement. Whether the principles Marco and Vincent had demonstrated could become embedded in the culture deeply enough that they'd outlast any single person. Because here's the brutal reality about transformation in systems built on fear. The default is always to slide back. Maintaining new patterns takes constant energy. Every person who benefits from the old way is a source of resistance. Every crisis tests whether the new values hold or whether everyone reverts to what's familiar. Marco was beginning to understand that the work he'd started wouldn't end. That choosing to live with integrity in complicated environments isn't a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. That the cost of staying true to yourself in spaces that reward something else entirely is ongoing, not a fixed price you pay once and then it's done. But he'd also learned something crucial: that cost is not wasted. Every moment of choosing authenticity over safety, every instance of maintaining dignity when it would be easier to compromise, Every choice to treat people as humans rather than as functions in a system, all of that accumulates, creates ripples, changes atmospheres in ways that are subtle but real. Vincent, for his part, was dealing with his own reckoning. He'd spent 3 decades building an identity around emotional invulnerability, and now that identity was being challenged by his own choices. It was uncomfortable. Sometimes it was painful. But there was also something liberating about it. About being able to acknowledge that the person he'd become in service of survival might not be the person he needed to be now that he'd actually survived. The relationship between Marco and Vincent settled into something neither of them had expected. Mutual respect that crossed every traditional boundary of age, power, and position. They weren't equals in any conventional sense, but they'd established something more valuable than equality: recognition. Each saw the other clearly, acknowledged what the other brought to the table, and valued it without needing to diminish themselves in the process. And the restaurant itself became something different. Still a place of power, still a hub for serious conversations and significant decisions, but now also a place where humanity was allowed. Where someone's kid could run through laughing without everyone tensing up. Where mistakes were corrected without humiliation. Where gratitude could be expressed without it being weaponized. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better. And that improvement, that demonstration that systems could evolve without completely collapsing, that power could be maintained while also being humane, that was the legacy being built one small choice at a time. Drop a comment if you've ever seen this happen in real life, where one person's authenticity created permission for others to be real too. Just right, I've seen this. Look, if you made it this far, you already know this isn't just another story channel. This is about something deeper, about understanding what happens when people choose authenticity over performance, when power meets conscience, when one small act of courage creates space for everyone else to be a little more human. And if that resonates with you, if you want more of these kinds of stories that actually make you think and feel something real, hit that subscribe button. Because this is what we do here. We dig into the messy, complicated, beautiful moments that reveal who people really are when everything is on the line. Leave a comment right now, just write, "I stayed till the end, so I know you were here for this whole journey." It matters more than you think. Every comment, every interaction tells me that these stories are landing the way they're supposed to. That we're building something together. And hey, if this hit you in a way you didn't expect, go ahead and drop a like. Not because I'm asking for it, but because you felt something. Because this story connected with something true in your own experience. There's another video right here that goes even deeper into what happens when people in positions of power make unexpected choices. It's a different story, but it explores that same territory, where morality and authority collide in ways that change everyone involved. Click on it and keep this conversation going. I'll meet you there.